It's Wednesday, December 30, 2020, and welcome to Asia Pacific Today. I'm Mike Ryan. China's trade war with Australia is affecting a growing number of industries, including the wine industry. CEO of Australian Wine and Grape, Tony BATTAGLENE, is moments away. Singapore and China have inked a number of agreements as they mark 30 years of diplomatic ties. Eugene Tan, an Associate Professor of Law at Singapore Management University, joins us shortly. Blake Christian will join us with his wrap of 2020 and what to look forward to in 2021. Plus the latest from the US with KIRK CLYATT. China's trade war with Australia is affecting a growing number of industries, including the wine industry. Tony BATTAGLENE is CEO of Australian Grape and Wine, the National Association of Australia's winegrape and wine producers, responsible for policy, trade and business outcomes for the entire industry. Tony, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
What's the latest on China's restrictions on Australian wine, and what are the known timelines in the anti-dumping case?
So I think it's important to understand that we actually have two cases and two sets of tariffs that have been imposed in Australia. So in the anti-dumping case, we've got a tariff that ranges between 107% to 212% that's been imposed. It's an interim tariff. The timeline for that interim tariff is 4 to 9 months, so there's a possibility extended. And during that time, there'll be the conversion into a permanent measure. So given what's happened so far, we expect that to be similar. The other one is the countervailing duties case that last week was announced of a 6.3 to 6.4% import duty. And again, it has the same timeline of 6 to 9 months with the same caveat that we'll probably get a permanent duty imposed in that time. And those permanent duties, they last for 5 years.
Wow, a long time, isn't it? And a bit of a headache. But you know, normally I'd say a glass of red might fix it up, but not in this case. What are our main markets for Australian wine? The share of those exports to those markets, and where China sits.
So China is our largest export market by far. It has 40% of our exports. It's about $1.2 billion. Then we have the United States and the United Kingdom. They're both about the same, and they're about $500 million mark. And then you have Canada, again, another significant market. And then we export to another, 160 odd countries. So, but they're the big four, and they're the ones where we're most exposed and where most of the growth opportunities, in fact, are like.
Chinese are making some nice wines too, aren't they? They've nicked all the great winemakers from around the world. And what are they about? I think I heard somewhere where they're the second largest wine exporter or in the world, and they would be the biggest in a couple of years' time. So we need to get our winemakers back, first of all, and make those delicious wines here. Yeah,
I don't think there are certainly some very, very good wines in China. It's a very difficult place to grow grapes though and make good wine. So their best region is a place called Ningxia, and it's so cold that they have to bury the vines in winter so they don't die. So that becomes very expensive, and it makes good wine, but it's not economic in the usual sense of the word.
Having grown up on the land and surrounded by grapes, the nice thing about burying the vines is that you wouldn't have to prune them, because that's the worst job God ever created. I think you must agree on that one.
Oh, I think there's no doubt that winter pruning is a job not for the faint-hearted, and one that you want to give away as much as you can.
Has all the wine exporter to China had duties imposed, including the more expensive brands like Penfolds and such?
So the duties are imposed on all wines, all still wines in bottles under 2 litres. So all those 750ml bottles, which go, and 98% of our exports to China are red wine. And so every one of that bottled wine is now subject to those import duties. Doesn't matter what the price point is.
That's a big chunk out of the wine industry, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's essentially made the market unviable. So the last fortnight, there have been no shipments that have gone into, or virtually no shipments that have left our ports and headed to China. And it's going to be like that for 4 years or 5 years.
Will the wine just sit there until it can be sold with higher duties imposed, or can some of it be diverted to other markets?
Yeah, so a lot of the wine, it will now be looking for other homes. The problem is, of course, it's very hard to build a market from scratch. And while we're in many markets, you've got to build your brand value and your brand cachet. So that takes time. So unfortunately, it's going to be a slow process. Hopefully, the domestic market will do their bit, and we're encouraging everyone to buy Australian this year and see if we can take some of that slack.
I recall years ago when we were doing some work in New York, one of my favourite wines is Ninth Island, the Pinot variety, of course. And I could actually buy a bottle of Ninth Island Pinot in New York cheaper than I could in Australia, which was quite a surprise. But at that stage, I wasn't complaining at all.
No, and a lot of the differences in prices come down to taxes. So we're a very heavily taxed country for alcohol. So, wine, when you put all the taxes on top of each other, about 46% of your bottle. So, that's a lot of money that's going to the government. And that means that, in the export markets, you're not paying all those prohibitive taxes.
Have you suggested to government, I'm sure they'll be tickled pink to hear it, but if you've been smashed by the Chinese tariffs and their trade war with Australia, perhaps the government could in some way alleviate some of the taxes, so therefore the damage or the hurt isn't as great.
Yeah, we've made a lot of suggestions to government. That is one of them, that we should have tax relief, certainly in the medium term for the next couple of years while we can diversify our markets. And we're also looking for the government to work with us on that long-term market diversification strategy. So that's going to be, we want a 10-year program, and not just for wine, but for all those products that are suffering in China. Let's work to get them into other markets, get down the barriers and getting that market onto the shelves.
Do you think the Chinese market was, the old saying, don't put too many eggs, or in our case, bottles of wine in that one basket?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've been cautioning people about their exposure to China, but you can't blame people for following the money. And the consumer in China loves our product, so they buy more of it than anyone else, and they pay a higher value than anyone else. So it's a highest price point market. So naturally, people are following the profits. And, it's been the political situation that has turned that round, unfortunately.
And this just doesn't hit the wine growers and the industry itself. It hits also the peripheral industries, those that rely on providing goods and services to output that bottle of wine.
Oh, absolutely. And regional economies, there's so much of regional Australia that relies on the wine sector, the grape growing and the winemaking. But you're right, the people who make posts, the people who put posts in the ground, the people who supply, and there's a lot of suppliers. About 46,000 jobs in Australia are associated with the wine sector, the grape and wine sector. So it's an important industry. And the other thing that really worries me is that the mental health aspect of this latest knock after a year of bushfires and COVID, where industry is suffering. There's a lot of people out there who are a very bad state of mind, and we really need to look after them.
Recall when I grew up, this is sort of like, the days going by. I'm sounding like my father actually, which I always cringed. But when I grew up, and I grew up in Mildura in Victoria, which is, for those out of our market, it's in Australia. But I recall having to pick the grapes, and I hated that because there were spiders and all sorts of uglies under those vines. Now they have machines, but the thing that really came home to me was that how all these 20-acre blocks in those days, and they've probably been swallowed, but there's still a lot of those around. But I used to find that these little blocks of 20 acres and 25 acres run by the Italians, they had two things. One was to die for, that was the home-baked bread in the kiln outside, it was stunning, this Italian bread. And the other, not to die for, but almost killed you, was the stuff they used to clean the tractor with and drink it. It was called grappa. So, there's a lot of memories there, and we need to sort of hold on to the romance and the goodness of the wine industry, don't we?
Oh yeah, and these areas are still just as good as they used to be. So I love going to the areas with that strong Italian heritage. My name's Italian, and you go there and you go to Griffith in the Riverina when it's salami making time.
Oh, stunning!
No better time.
But the grappa, clean the tractor, which is a massive Ferguson in those days. Clean the tractor, and then they drank it. It was pretty wild. My first, when I stuck out one day, I was 15. Here's a thing, 15, and at some fair at the school, and someone got hold of this bottle of grappa. So I thought, I'm going to have a mouthful of this stuff. And almost turned me off drinking, forever. It's the strongest drink. Do you drink grappa?
Oh, absolutely not. I'll go nowhere near grappa. Look, I admire people who do. I respect them, their courage, it's clear. But it would not only cleans tractors, it cleans everything, I think.
Yeah, and it just rot away the stomach. What do you estimate to be the total cost to the industry, including suppliers and associated employment?
Oh, look, we haven't actually got the final analysis on that. It's potentially very, very large. And the thing about this is it's not just the short term, but this is going to be a cost for several years as we try and diversify markets. So it's something that I think will probably be larger impact next vintage. I think this vintage people have, we've had poor vintages for the last 3 years. We'll have an above average one this year. So there'll be wine back in tanks, storage down. So I think it's going to get worse next year, but the cost will be great. There will be people who will go out of business. There's no doubt.
A lot have said the Chinese tariffs on wine and their trade war, inverted commas there, against Australia is part to blame because of the new trade deal that China had with the US prior to COVID, and they had to make some sort of wriggle room to be able to adhere to those conditions for that deal with the US and Trump and the Trump administration. Is there a part of that you think that they've said we actually have to make some wriggle room here to keep to our part of the deal with the Americans, or is it just being pig-headed?
I think it's more the latter. I think there has been tensions created because of the US in the international sphere with China, but I don't think we can blame that deal on this. There's other factors at play here, and clearly the relationship with China is extremely poor, and all the press has shown that it's not going to get any better anytime soon, and we are clearly being made an example of.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Some of the pundits are saying be a little more tolerant, and others are saying no, we have to stand up for our own sovereignty here. What do you think? Do you think there should be an in between of that, or do you think that the government's on the only track? It's not really hasn't got a whole lot of choice. So is it can we do something different than we're doing right now, or is it just the way it is and we have to accept it?
I think we've reached the stage where we are at a point where there's no going back. So I think now we do have our sovereignty, which we have to support, and there's no doubt about that. I think that we have been caught in the crossfire, the economic crossfire. We will go through all the legal channels that we can, both within China and also if we go to the World Trade Organization like. So we'll keep pursue this. We don't think we've got a case to answer, but I think there's very little the government can now do, because there's no dialogue. The Chinese ministers refuse to meet with our politicians, and that makes it extremely difficult to actually come to a solution. And
their lone wolf approach, let's throw out an insult here and there and everywhere, that doesn't help much either. Who benefits most from this Chinese action? Well,
I don't think. The only people who will benefit, and the Chinese consumer won't benefit, and the Chinese industries that rely on our exports won't benefit. So there's pain in China as well coming from this. So the people who will benefit will be some of our competitors, people like Chile, people like Spain, people like Italy, who export to China and can increase to fill the gap that we had. So I would think that they're going to be the biggest beneficiaries, but they don't wish to benefit at our expense. I've had a lot of calls of support from people in these countries, our competitors, if you like, who are also good friends who don't want to benefit, but of course they will take advantage.
What do you expect to happen at the end of the anti-dumping process?
Look, given the evidence that we've seen that's been provided for the interim duties, there's been no basis for that. But it looks like is that what will come down at the end is something very similar to where we are now, so a permanent duty in that 200% range, and we will think it'll be challengeable, but of course challenging in WTO takes you 3 to 4 years. Dumping duties are put on for 4 or 5 years, so it's not going to make much benefit. So I don't think, unless the political situation improves, that we'll get a good result, even though there's no evidence to support the fact that we're hurting their industry.
Producers can pivot to other markets and which can take time. Which ones, though, do you think, if we have have time to do this, which ones do you think are likely to be more responsive to our requests?
So initially, obviously, the domestic market springs to mind. This 20% of our domestic market is imports, and so we're hoping people will buy Australian. But that, of course, is not a long sustainable solution. So we need the United Kingdom. With a Brexit, which is looking increasingly difficult, there will be people who prefer to buy Australian rather than European. It will be easier to access. And of course, United States and Canada are both big markets that we're underweight in. But I think really we have to have a long-term strategy that looks more into Asia, more into India, and even places like East Africa and Russia, where are very difficult markets now. But we need to plan for 5 to 10 years, because we're going to be in this for that long. What
about getting wine into North America? What would the time frame be? And getting larger and larger amounts. Now there's some good Australian wines around the States, but you're still swamped by California wines and Washington State wines and stuff like that. So is that a practical option or whimsical thinking?
It's we've put a lot of effort into the market in the United States for the last 3 years, and it's proving very tough. And because there's very good local wine, and of course domestic wine has a very good cachet, so it's proving very difficult to get into the 3-tier distribution system. But we will redouble our efforts. People do like our wine there. It is good value. It is good quality. We've been higher before. So we've been up to the $1 billion before the GFC in the US. So we can come back. So yeah, expect to see a lot more wine on the shelves.
Let's rewind a bit and go to the actual growers. Those that they're the ones that are starting the process of a great bottle of wine. Are they feeling though that this is just getting a bit much for them, because it's a hard life on the land?
Yeah, no, it is really tough for growers in particular. And we're going into our next vintage, coming up in, well, some people start picking in late December, but, January, February, March are peak times. And there's a lot of concerns about, will people want my grapes, and what are the prices going to be? And all indications are prices will be, lower, because obviously demand is not going to be there without China. So there's pressure on prices. And and as I say, with the mental health aspect, we've had a couple of tough vintages. We had a record low vintage last year, and these guys are in pain. And if you haven't got a good contract and dealing with a winemaker, you've got a relationship, it could be really tough. So I'm really concerned about a lot of our growers.
What about bright spots? Any bright spots for the Australian wine industry? I know over Christmas that we'll be consuming probably far too much, and that our liver will get a fair beating or battering. But what are other bright spots? Because once Christmas is gone, then you're back to post or still during COVID, and COVID does put restrictions on how we exist at the moment.
I think there's a lot of bright spots. So we're in the state where we believe we can diversify our markets. It will take time. We also believe that we'll get a good hit domestically as people have sympathy with us. So I think our product has never been better, and we'll have a better vintage this year, and stocks are down. So it's never been a better time to have a crisis like this. The only thing is this year's been crisis after crisis, and it's just been really tough. So, but we're a resilient bunch, and you'll see us come through it.
Have a great Christmas. Great talking with you. We must do this more often. Hope the headache isn't too bad for you after Christmas Day. That's what Boxing Day is all about. You sit there whinging about how sore the head is, but we have cricket. So what more? We're living the dream, aren't we?
Oh, we are. Look, we've had some tough times, but we'll get through it. And yeah, have a drink, watch the cricket, and I hope Santa brings you something nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Singapore and China have pledged deeper cooperation in areas ranging from public health to trade, with the recent signings of 10 agreements. Eugene Tan is an Associate Professor of Law at Singapore Management University. Eugene holds degrees from the National University of Singapore Faculty of Law, the London School of Economics, and Stanford University. Eugene, great to see you once again.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's always a pleasure.
Singapore-China trade has increased significantly in recent years. Can you tell us more about the recent history of China-Singapore relations?
Certainly. 2020 marks, the 30th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Singapore and China. Although ties between Singapore and China go back, to the early 70s, but out of sensitivity to the concerns of Singapore's neighbors, Singapore delayed this establishment of formal diplomatic ties, until all these ASEAN Association of Southeast Asian member states have established diplomatic ties with China. But since then, over the last 30 years, relations have been very multifaceted, very deep, very rich. We also have, significant growth in trade and investments, of both countries. We're looking at, government-to-government projects, so in many sense, this is a very deep, rich, and substantive relationship. So if you think about the government-to-government projects, these are those such as the Suzhou Industrial Park, the Tianjin Eco-City, and now the Chongqing Connectivity Initiative. And what all these projects serve to do really is to have both countries, to work together, to share ideas, to bring their different strengths to the table. And I think what this reflects really is, the determination on the part of both countries and their leaders, to recognize that relationships need a lot of work. There is a need to grow the ties. There is a need to explore new relationship, new developments, new opportunities. And we mustn't forget, China today is very different from the China that Singapore established ties with in 1990.
Singapore has inked some major agreements with China, deepening economic, financial, health and technical ties. But how is this viewed in Singapore?
In Singapore, I think Singaporeans will recognize the need for Singapore to maintain healthy relations, with as many countries as possible. And China is certainly one of them. Given its rise, over the last 30 years, given the sort of impact, that China has in so many different areas of development, the rise of the Chinese economy as well. So the recent inking of several major agreements, to mark the 30th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Singapore and China, these are very much welcome, particularly, by the business, scientific, and financial communities. I think there is a sense that it is important to have these agreements, that will help to catalyze closer ties, enable Singapore to have inroads, into the Chinese market, if I can put it that way. Again, these ties are seen, as an attempt to sustain and develop stronger ties. China has much to offer, and Singapore believes that it also has much to offer. And I think when you look at these agreements, I think there is the clear recognition, that both countries appreciate how these different ties, whether you're talking about economic, financial, health, or technical ties, that they show both countries continuing to be relevant to each other. What that also indicates, is how, both countries have continued to nurture their ties, appreciating that countries have evolved, with different strengths, with different capabilities. And so Singapore's ability, to offer technical assistance, which was a mainstay of Singapore's program in the early days of our formal ties, that has now given way, to much more significant cooperation, where I think, there is a sense that there is a lot more that can be done. So it is a challenge, for both countries to find new areas of development and to ensure, that ties remain strong.
China's been very aggressive towards Australia, where bilateral cooperation has been extensive over many decades. How is this conflict in the relationship and unilateral targeting of Australian goods being viewed in Singapore?
Not much has actually been said in Singapore, right? So I think here, if you look at the corridors of power, I think this is seen as a bilateral uh, issue, a hiccup, that will have to be worked at, by Australia and China. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if, there is a sense of regret, in Singapore, over the way things have developed. And so I think, there is a view that, if both countries can repair those ties, there would be significant advantage to it. I mean, to think about, $100 billion of trade, between China and Australia, and how that all is going to be affected. I think here, we are looking at a relationship where my sense is, that sometimes megaphone diplomacy, will not work so well. That sometimes, a softly approach, if I can put it that way, will work better. I think in any close relationship, there will always be disagreements, tension, and Singapore has experienced that, with China. But then I think what it requires then, is for leaders and the diplomats of both countries, to work at the differences away, from the public eye, and I think that's how diplomatic ties can be rebuilt. I mean, personally, for me, to see how, in a matter of 5-6 years, the relationship, being at a high and then going down to, to the level that it is today, I think that's somewhat tragic. But we're now seeing a sort of a truce, and I suppose, that's an attempt, by both countries, having each set their piece, to now, get back to the table and repair, what is essentially a very important relationship, not just to both countries, but to the region and to the world as well.
There's key concerns, most notably under the Trump administration, about espionage and CCP influence of the US across a broad number of fronts. Do you think this could happen in Singapore?
I wouldn't be surprised if, the security community, the intelligence community, keeping a close eye on this. But I think we should remember that this exertion of foreign influence, is always there. I mean, countries do it all the time. There are just different modes of doing so. It is really an attempt to exert, what has been described, as soft power, right? So the idea that countries would be aligned with your position, without you having to coerce them, for example. But I think the key question is not whether, influence is being exerted, but rather how the influence is being exerted. And I think that becomes important, for any country to be able to be very firm and clear about what its national interests are, what are the bright lines that cannot be crossed, and also, the need for countries. For example, Singapore, as a very small nation state, the need to protect our national sovereignty, and to ensure that countries, big or small, friendly or not, recognize that. And one critical ingredient, for healthy Sino-Singapore relations, if I can put it that way, really is, the Singapore government's conscious attempt and effort, to reinforce on China, that Singapore is not a Chinese state. So even though we have 3/4 of the population being ethnically Chinese, we are certainly not, another China, another Taiwan or Hong Kong, but we are an independent sovereign nation state. And I think when these fundamentals are recognized and given effect to, then I think that helps for bilateral relations to be kept on an even keel.
How does Singapore view China's role with COVID-19 in maybe the creating or the exporting of this virus, which is just, it's still here, believe it or not?
It still is. And so I think that's where the focus must be for now, right? The focus must be on working across borders, perhaps in a sort of a global effort, to fight COVID-19. So whether that means sharing expertise, sharing ideas about what could work and what might not work. I think this is a global pandemic. I think there is no time, at this stage, for finger pointing. Certainly there are lessons to be learned, but I think there is a right time and place, and I think it's critical, not to finger point, not to take the view, without appropriate evidence, that this was a malicious attempt. I think when you look at COVID-19, it is a tragedy, right? It is a tragedy that has befallen, the world. Many people are affected, and so it is really critical, for countries to come together. So when you think about now, with vaccines being approved, for use, emergency use, I think the challenge then becomes, not so much about whether a country. I think the challenge becomes, how do you help countries who may not be able to afford, the vaccines, to be able to have the opportunity, to access them, right? Because we certainly don't want a world, in which there is now this divide based on whether a country has vaccines or not. And we should remember, that because this is a pandemic, and so long as certain parts of the world are not adequately protected, it will come back to even bite those countries, which have access to vaccines. Because we mustn't forget, we are looking at viruses, which can mutate. And so, the vaccines may be able to deal with the current strains of the coronavirus, but we cannot say for certainty, that the virus will not mutate, for which, the vaccines today, may not be of any effect. One certainly hopes that we don't come to that stage. But I think it's important to recognize that no man's is an island, and in a situation like a global pandemic, it is time to close ranks. And once we have overcome, this threat, then perhaps, we can focus on making sure, that we do better if a similar threat were to arise in future. So I think, Singapore's focus is very much on working with like-minded countries, in fighting COVID-19. And so that also extends, to the COVAX program. So that's the WHO initiative, to try to ensure, that countries, including the poor countries which may have difficulty getting vaccines, will have as much access to the vaccines as possible. I mean, this is a global threat, and so it needs a global response rather than finger pointing.
I don't know about you, Eugene, but if I hear any more about COVID normal, I'm going to vomit. I just want normal. I just want to be able to go out, hop on a plane or whatever, not have to wear a mask because I have a lovely smile, and you have a lovely smile too, and just get back to being human. That's my New Year's resolution, just to get back to being human. Although many friends will say, for me to be human is almost the impossible dream. What's your great wish for 2021?
I suppose, for me, 2021, I mean, I haven't given much thought to it, but I share, your sentiments, the need for humanity, for the world, for each one of us, to use this crisis, which has hit many of us in very unexpected and challenging ways, to reflect on it and the hope, that we will come out better and stronger, in terms of our humanity. I think this is one episode, a long one, a scary one, if I can put it that way. In which I begin to perhaps appreciate even more, that as human beings, the need for community, the need for fellowship, the need for interaction, is so crucial. That even with technology, which is now enabling me, to be interviewed by you here with me in Singapore and you in Australia, that there is still that barrier. And so, the question now is, how can we blend, the best of the social interactions, aided by technology, to bring out, our humanity, to bring the world closer together. So I suppose my hope is that, we'll all become more human, with recognizing, the importance of life and of values, in a very challenging world and challenging time as well.
Eugene, have a wonderful 2021. We'll have a glass of great Australian wine for you and talk to you early next year.
Thank you, Mike. Have a wonderful holiday season and all the best wishes, to your team and you and your family for 2021.
Well, as we wrap up the year that almost wasn't, that shouldn't have been, 2020, the year of COVID, and the year that Blake Christian took to the airwaves on a permanent basis and has been terrorising the Democrats ever since. Blake, how are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
The highlights and the lowlights of 2020, there's been many. What was some of the highlights for you and for Holthouse, Carlin and Van Trite?
I think we feel very blessed that we were able, we were one industry that, if anything, we benefited from COVID. Our clients, had tremendous need for accounting services, consulting services, how to navigate the PPP loan process, how to shut down, how to start up, and also to be as tax efficient as possible in a crazy world. So we feel very happy that we were able to ride through this much better than I predicted when it first hit. But the sad, it saddens me that the small businesses are just so just have had just tremendous pressure, closures, and I don't think we'll see by the end of the year the full fallout from COVID economically. I think 2021, while everybody's looking forward to it, I think that's when a lot of the small and medium-sized businesses that were kind of leveraged and didn't have a lot of savings are going to fold. We've had a lot of bankruptcies in 2020, but I think we're going to have 2, 3, 4 times as many in 2021.
The long, dark winter may be never-ending for some businesses under Joe Biden. Where do you see 2021 going for business under a Biden administration?
Well, my big fear is that he'll lock us down, businesses for 3 to 6 months and just further compound the economic downturn. And I just California, where I'm sitting at the moment, is it's just amazing to see the lack of open businesses and the boarded up businesses in a lot of cities. And we're just going to have a lot more of that if he does shut us down. And I think he's made a lot of public comments that he's tending not only to have mandatory masks, which I don't have a real problem with, but if he starts shutting down more and more businesses nationwide, it's going to get very ugly economically.
No, just looking at the mask thing before we continue, it's interesting. You were wearing one before, but they're saying that what happens is that if you breathe in with the mask, because it doesn't protect you, what it does do, it protects the other person from getting it. So you all need to wear it. Problem is, when you take it off, if you touch the front of it, you're going to pass on the germs that are already on the mask. So I mean, maybe we need to have lessons in how to wear masks. Joe wears them on his ears. So I mean, maybe we could do a wearing of mask 101.
Not a bad idea. You know, the efficacy of masks is still highly debated. I don't have a problem wearing one. I encourage other people to wear them, but you know, we can't be sure that they're fully effective. So.
And now I cut you off. You're halfway through saying something, and I butted in. End of the year, that's what happens.
Oh, the short list of things I worry about in a Biden administration, the lockdown, number one, number two, tax hikes, but that's really, we have to wait and see how the Georgia Senate race pans out. If they win both of those seats, then he has free reign for tax increases. I don't think that'll happen, but if it does, it's going to be a pretty now that I'll describe it as a long dark winter, and he has a lot of tax hikes out there, and things like I think he's very anti-oil. He says he's not going to shut down fracking and things, which has been just an unbelievable engine in our economy and has brought oil imports to minimal levels because we produce so much on our own. Now we're exporting. So if that, he may not shut that down, but he's going to tax the heck out of it, and he's going to have a lot of fees on it. And I think the same goes with guns and rifles and things. He's not going to be able to ban them, but he's going to put a bunch of taxes and fees on those to make and probably cut off the supply of ammunition, and so those have the same effect almost of reclaiming guns. So I think there's just a lot of things out there, and I think to be fair, I don't think all of these are Mr. Biden's, objectives, but he has a lot of people on the far left to satisfy who helped him get into office. So that's what we got to wait and see who's going to have the power.
Really exciting year 2020. I say that with tongue in cheek and sweat on the brow, but where do you see humanity going? This is sort of getting off the money side of things, but where do you see humanity going 2021? Do you think there'll be more conflicts or less conflicts?
From a worldwide basis, I think you're going to have a lot more conflicts. We have a lot of people upset with China about their lack of disclosure on the virus, letting their population fly all over the world, but not letting them fly within China. I mean, there's some disturbing things that happened. You've got a lot of things going on in the Middle East, and now I think when you had a heavy-handed Trump who was not going to be bullied, and now you have Biden who, I think will roll over on some of these issues. I do worry about, some of the, Russia and China and South Korea or North Korea, having, getting a little more aggressive with us. From a community, from a U.S. standpoint, again, the polarized Democrat versus Republican challenges are, there's a lot of people arguing all the time, But at the same time, I saw some amazing things at the community level and industry level. Like just today, John Sangmeister, who you've interviewed, a restaurant we own together. We raised in the course of just a couple of hours, thousands of dollars for the employees to help their families get through and make it a nice Christmas. And we've seen that throughout Long Beach. A whole bunch of the restaurateurs and the customers have just put in thousands of toys, thousands of dollars of money to help people out. And so I have seen when the going gets tough, I've definitely seen people step up in Park City where I live full time. Some groups are helping the police celebrate, and the sheriff and the fire department, and also they've helped. We have a very large Mexican American community there because we're a hospitality based city, and hundreds of thousands of dollars went into various funds there to help them out because they needed help with rent, and they were the hardest hit by the pandemic.
You've been saved by the pandemic in one way, Blake, because they've banned basically singing and dancing, and I know that your prowess as a singer and a dancer is the reason why you chose to be a CPA.
Yeah, I have no talent in those other areas.
So there is always good from bad, and that's one of the good things. So your wife can actually take out those earplugs, and those close by cannot be embarrassed by this. This is a cross between an octopus and Fred Astaire. It's pretty scary.
Right. Thank goodness my 16-year-old daughter has an incredible voice, and even sang at Carnegie Hall a couple of weeks before COVID hit. And but I have none of that talent. And she reminds me in case I do break out into song when something good on the radio is there. She stops me.
That's right. You'll be arrested for disturbing the peace. Blake Christian from Holthouse, Carlin and Van Trite. Always a pleasure. Have a great New Year's Eve, and all the best for 2021. And we'll see you in about 2 weeks' time.
Happy New Year.
Now let me just see, how many ducks are there? There's 1, 2, oh sorry, we're on camera. I was just counting the ducks over to your right, Kirk, and I wasn't sure if you had one for Christmas lunch. How was your Christmas?
No. Wonderful. We just hung out at home. We supported local businesses by ordering out, had some nice roast beef. So I'm just hanging out here until my number comes up, and it was gone with the draft. No, wait, that's an old
but, hey,
song from the 40s.
You've got some exciting things to look forward to next year. You've got a very, very older than you president. You'll have a vaccine. Yes. Maybe the casinos will open next year. Is looking better.
They're open. They're open. The thing is, the buffets need to open back up. That was an amazing day back on March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day, and at Stations Boulder, which I used to play at a lot. We used to have good luck there. They were having corned beef, and it was just delicious. To their credit, it was fabulous, but it was just kind of a surreal experience because we finished the buffet, and they were turning off the machines. Now, my partner, Mark, this is my 6th year here living in Las Vegas, and after I'd have a losing session, which occasionally does happen, you don't always win gambling, and I said, don't worry, they won't close. But they did. They closed for I think 75 days, 73. It was in the 70s. So that was just traumatic. A traumatic year here for Las Vegas. And then the wildest thing is all these orders issued in various states. Order you to stay home. You must stay home. And the penalty for disobeying that order, you must stay home. Nothing. Now, it's very difficult to enforce rules and social norms when the penalty for disobeying is nothing, except, of course, killing your neighbor.
I was actually happy because I put a call into my friend Donald Trump, and I said, look, we need to have some laws out that will stop Kirk from singing too loud. And part of it was you were not allowed to sing too loud at Christmas. And thank you to Donald.
No, well, it's interesting. I think if he had gone with the cash back in the summer, we had, of course, the big relief bill in the spring, and then we bogged down with Mitch McConnell delaying everything. The Democrats passed legislation months ago. Mitch McConnell in the Senate said, no, 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 you can't have no more. And I haven't even been doing any marijuana. I don't drink that much, but marijuana, legal here in Nevada, we give it a thumbs up. But I think if Donald had gone along and said, let's go ahead with the $2.2 trillion relief bill in the summer, that would have been enough, at least in the key states, to swing the election. But no, now he's having just a narcissistic breakdown, and we hope the world can survive for the next couple of weeks until the 20th.
Yeah, and the other way he could have won, which you're overlooking, is that he could have had the maybe the state police pull up the truck that had that truck full of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. Maybe he could have done that, but but that would be using the law to your advantage, and you can't stop a truck with all those ballots.
Even Bill Barr, you could not ask for a more sycophant attorney general. Even he said, "You've gone too far, Donald. You've gone too far." Even Pat Robertson. The evangelist Pat Robertson, who 100 years ago tried to run for president himself, even he said, the gig's up. Geraldo Rivera, one of Trump's talk show friends. Give it up, Donald. So it'll be fascinating. Okay, but I'm ready to give up this year. Let's just give up 2020 and move out of here.
Tell me Mexico was on the cards at one stage.
Yeah,
Tell
absolutely.
me
Still is.
a couple of the highlights and a couple of the lowlights.
Well, let me tell you, one of the things that got me through the year, and you could go back to our early shows, and you can see where I went into our pool on the driveway. I use this as a weight for one of our lamps. It's the giant shark float. Doesn't really look like much of a shark there, does it? Maybe here. Oh, there's his mouth. Giant, which I use as a weight now for one of the lights here. But having that pool, above ground pool, can you get more low class
in the driveway? In the driveway.
Can you get more upscale? Can you get more exciting, sexy Vegas than having an above ground pool in your driveway? But let me tell you, I loved it. It helped keep me sane. And
that's saying something.
Semi-sane. What else? I had a very nice trip to help my daughter. I took just kind of snuck in there between the virus and went back to Philadelphia to see her, and that was a good trip.
The state of corruption, of course.
No. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is a progressive city, and it's really interesting.
You showed me around the place, and it's a lovely state.
Yes.
It's just under the bricks, the pavements, there's this evil, I think it's from the Democrats. It's a Democrat feeling that they alter the election.
It's a schizophrenic state because you have the big city, Philadelphia. You have another fairly big city, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, my gosh. They won their first 11 football games in a row this year. Then they lost 3 in a row. Unbelievable. Anyway, so you have very progressive Philadelphia, fairly progressive Pittsburgh, and like Kentucky and West Virginia in the middle. You call it Pennsyltucky there because it really is pretty much just Appalachia in between these two big cities, which makes for interesting politics in the Keystone State, to say the least. And by the way, a little bit of American trivia for you. That is not actually a state. Pennsylvania is a commonwealth, not a state. It's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and there are a couple of others, believe it or not, the Commonwealth of Kentucky and Commonwealth of Virginia. Everything else is a state in the U.S. I think they might have had a ballot measure this year, one of the more interesting ones. You'd have to double check me on this. I'm just kind of winging it. But Rhode Island, the smallest state as far as landmass goes, with the longest names, it was the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. And I think they voted finally to lop off the Providence Plantations from the name of the state in Rhode Island. So just some minutia of what happened this year. But I'm trying to think of good things. I lived through it. Got to float in the pool a lot. What else good happened?
The ducks are healthy. The rabbits are healthy.
Yeah.
Joe Biden still has 75% of his marbles. I mean, we would say marbles, so that's great.
That's okay. Even if you were right about that, even if it was just 75%, I'll take Joe Biden 75% of his marbles, then Donald Trump, who was off the evil deep end. And you know, one of the things that he's done, he's executed more federal prisoners, I think, in the last year than there have been executed in the last 130 years. He's just death on the way out. There's a hashtag on Twitter, which is hi, how are you? How are you? Nice to see you. About everything Trump touches dies. It's like ETTD. Everything Trump touches dies. And he's certainly trying to live up to that on the way out. The death penalty, one of the stupidest punishments you could have. It's much more cost effective when you look at the appeals, the amount of labor, everything involved in it, to keep someone with a life prison sentence than with a death sentence. But don't tell that to Trump and the Republicans, because they're pro-life. That's right. They're pro-life. So, and of course, they could be wrong. And if you got the person alive, you could always say, "Oh, sorry about that." But if they're dead, it's tough to bring them back.
But we have Kamala. I mean, I've said the name right, Kamala. Or
yeah, Kamala.
But
Kamala.
look, she uses California as part of her platform of her success. Well, just looking at who's leaving California, such as Elon Musk moving to Texas, Larry Ellison to Hawaii, Gene Simmons to Washington. And look at the numbers that have left California in the last year.
Who are you talking about, Gene Simmons?
No, I put him in because he's your favourite singer. But give me a tongue like Gene Simmons. I want to see it.
Gene was great. I mean, Gene's a little wild now with his political views. But Gene used to intimidate the hell out of me when I started in radio. He would come into the studio and do interviews. And back in the beginning, Gene would be not in makeup, obviously, but that was in the days when they couldn't get their pictures without makeup. So you would think it was the president coming in with as much security as they had, because those days the paparazzi was still trying to get their unmade up faces. He was a fun interview. He was a fun. I took calls one day. One of the few things I actually remember about being on the radio. I wish I might have it somewhere, but this caller called in, and she said, "Gene, what makes you think you're so good in bed? What makes you think you're so good in bed?" Without dropping a beat. It was almost like they planned it. I don't think they did, but it's almost like he planned it. Gene Simmons says, "Because every time I'm in bed, all I ever hear is, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God."
She was very religious.
But it was worth it.
She was very religious. Now, back to California, back to Kamala. Kamala.
Yeah.
Kamala, one of those, all three, and she probably has that many personalities. Look at California has lost, they say, around about 653,000 residents last year. Now they're moving to Texas, Arizona, Washington, Nevada to see you, obviously, and Oregon. Is that just because of, take away the COVID? Is that more because of the lack of law and order now? You've got a new district attorney there, a Soros-backed district attorney.
It's all money related. California is a wonderful place to live and crowd related. But when, especially, I used to say it beforehand, and that's one of the reasons that Nevada, 20 years ago, a reliable conservative state, a Republican state, has now become a reliable Democrat state, is because so many people have moved here. I used to call them the California refugees. And just in the time that I've lived here, you can see a noticeable increase in traffic, especially in the peripheral areas of the communities that we've got. And now with COVID, with somebody who can work from home, why work from home in a 2-bedroom apartment in San Jose that you're paying $3,000 a month for, when you can come to Vegas and for $2,000 a month rent or buy a very nice house with a pool in the backyard, and you can chill and enjoy the good life. So if it doesn't matter where you live, the economics say it's a much better deal to come here. And then you also have the economic incentives. Places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who wouldn't want to go there? They're offering
You wouldn't.
No, never. They'll give you like $10,000 to show up, if you stay a certain length of time. Vermont, if you're into skiing, I guess that's good. Even Hawaii is offering incentives to work from home on the Aloha State. I couldn't live there. You did, of course, Mike.
Yes, you went there, and you had a wonderful weekend helping me crank up one of our radio stations.
At convenience stores. But, the reason I couldn't live there is not that. that was actually kind of an interesting experience. It's the fact they need some consonants in the Hawaiian alphabet. It's like, you forget about buy a vowel. Let's buy some consonants, because I couldn't pronounce anything.
But do you know you have this attraction to Hawaii? I say that because the second largest Hawaiian city in the world is Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, yes, that's probably true. Just like the second largest Greek city in the world is Melbourne. We are, in fact, the ninth island, and you do definitely see a Hawaiian influence. And the hotel downtown, the Californian, ought to change the name to the Hawaiian, because it really does cater to the Hawaiian clientele. But now you've got to go through this rigmarole. You can go to the Hawaiian Air page, and we are getting, I think, one flight a day now or something like that. But what a rigmarole to get there, to show the COVID test, everything.
It's worth it.
No. I mean, I'm sure the outer islands are nice, but I've just hung out with you on Oahu, and Oahu, it's a traffic jam on a rock.
It is, it is. But a lovely place to have a traffic jam, let me tell you.
Yeah, to be stuck in traffic. Well, let's just hope for the best here in 2021. It's going to be a wild ride. That is for sure. I think we've kind of got no place to go but up. And if President Biden can do what he proposes to do, to be a president for all people and unite America, it's going to be like a miracle worker, because it's a scary, divided time here in the United States. And it's interesting to see New South Wales, freaking out, closing the border over, 15, 20 cases of COVID. Here, we're saying, oh, we did better today. We only had 2,500 cases here in Nevada, mostly here in Las Vegas, and you wonder why I hang out here in the OLA. So, I mean, it'd be amazing to see, to get us together. And I was reading some of the travel guidelines from Queensland Police, and all I can say to myself is that would be impossible here in the United States. Americans there would be blood in the streets, and Australians, let's just face it, a little more civilized than Americans. Well, present company may be excluded.
That's right. But see, you're almost an Australian yourself. Kirk, have a great 2021. Don't drink too much on New Year's Eve, although you have a great supply of liquor.
And I just can't wait to get the shark blown up again and get back in the pool in the driveway.
A little cold right now.
Oh, and there's somebody violating the speed limit down our road right now.
KIRK Clyatt from Las Vegas, Nevada's #1 Democrat. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
And that's it for Asia Pacific today, December 30, 2020. From all of us here at Talking Dog Media, Happy New Year. I'm Mike Ryan.